Gonna take a look at Agricola. So, first of all, if you are not one of my regular viewers, if you're a Euro lover and are looking for a Euro lover's introduction or whatever to the game, this is not the video for you. Go away. Seriously. This is not my kind of game. Why am I covering it? I get this kind of question when I play something that I don't really like. There are a number of reasons, and I'll hit into some of them on my introduction. So, I play everything that I pick up, as much as I can. And this was an intensely popular game at one point, and I had my eye out for it for a while. I didn't ever buy a copy because basically what happened was I got really hooked on a few Euro-ish type things, and probably the most Euro games that I really, really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with Puerto Rico, and I had a huge amount of fun with Dominion, right? Okay. But what I've learned is that the heavier and heavier you get down the worker placement line, and this isn't very heavy, but trust me, things like Le Havre have been problems for me, the less I like the game. The more I feel like, well, there's two factors. One, I'm being handed an excess of choices. An excess of choices, and it's not really clear what I'm trying to do, you know? I'm trying to score points. That's the whole thing. The games become these point salad type things. Why do they become point salads? They become them in order to offer many, many different opportunities for victory. Okay, people are like, well, there's many paths to victory, and that's a good thing. Well, maybe, maybe not. It depends on what the victory is. Here, it's a point salad. And when you hand me point salad and you hand me lots and lots of choices, I got trouble figuring it all out. More than that, there's more than one game of this model. You know, if there was just a handful of them, a couple of them, I would be okay. But when you come down to, you know, Puerto Rico, I think was kind of a point salad-y game, but I had fun with it. But, you know, the second or third one, I'm starting to say, geez, these are getting really boring. They're not the same thing. I mean, they've got different design ideas, different concepts coming out in them, and that's fun and all. In some sort of way, there's a certain excitement to that. But the heavier they get along those lines, the less I'm going to like them because it's not something I'm really thrilled with. I am not a big fan of worker placement. I'm not a big fan, and this is a worker placement point salad type thing. I'm not a fan of having too many choices. I don't mind having a couple of choices that I can just look at and assess without a deep understanding of the game and say, you know what? It's one of these two. You know? Anyway, what ended up happening was I had my eye on the game for a while, concept-wise. I thought my wife would enjoy it. We never got to play it. And I picked it up fairly late. I think maybe when I moved here. But the high rating, the fact that I've liked some highly rated Euros, the fact that it's not one of the modern heavy Euros, right? This is fairly old. I don't know when it's from. It's from the 17th century. 2007, okay? Which things hadn't gotten that far out of hand, but maybe this is one of those heading in that direction a little bit further, because nowadays I look at these things and I'm like, oh man, they're just getting worse and worse. And people try to explain them and my eyes just glaze over because it's all about the relationships of trying to develop your engine out of the shit that's available. And that's just no fun to me, you know, whatever. However, I do like to play all my games. If I pick something up, I'm going to play it and I'm going to video it. In this particular case, I looked at it and said, you know, to give this anything like a fair try, I've got to play a playthrough of it once in order to get some kind of grasp on what the fuck the point salad is about. And yeah, I should have given another warning. Some people don't like my salty language. Time to leave. It's gonna get a lot worse as I get frustrated with the game itself. Okay, so what is the goal in this game? Well, that's kind of hard to define. It's to get points, and your points are largely defined on this little card here, based on how many of certain things you have. And some things that seem valuable are worth nothing, and like food, which is essentially money in the game. Like, it's called food, but you get it in exchange for doing jobs. However, it's absolutely vital, because if you don't feed your people, you don't get a starvation bonus like you do in one of the better worker placement games after the Holocaust. You don't have a lot of options in that game. If you don't feed your people, each food you're lacking, you have to go begging for, and that's worth -3 victory points, which is a pretty big hit. You do not want to go begging. Let's talk a little bit about the components and what they do, and then we'll hit the rules, which, boy, you don't want to hear me read the rules, but it's necessary for the context of my playthroughs. So I have gotten in the habit of doing it. First of all, game holds up to 5 players. You have a bunch of pieces for each player. These are their people. You're limited to 5 people. These are fences, which we'll be using to create pasture land for your little animals. Now, my copy came with a couple of things of interest. One is it came with like a bunch of expansion decks, and I'm playing with all of them because that's just how I am. But it also came with these little animals, which give you some, I guess, what you need in this, which is cows, sheep, and pigs. I don't have anything that uses chickens or anything like that, so I don't know, maybe there's expansions that add more animal types to the game. I can't imagine that particularly helping. Then you have actions, and it took me a little while to figure out what the actions were, because most of them are these cards here, and these are going to become actions too on the other side. I'll show you, they look the same as the ones you've got showing. Actually, no, right? Let's see. Yeah. There's 2 ways you can play the game. There's the family-friendly version, which is a lighter version of it. And then there's the full game. And I, of course, being who I am, jumped into the full game, even though the complexity of these games is part of what drives my irritation and lack of enjoyment. But anyway, some of these cards, the cards are all kind of taking up a space that looks like a card shape. But then there's these printed ones, and they fit about 2 per card space on those. So this is not this and this, it's this, 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 this. They're each separate ones. Okay, anyway. What these tell you, these are your actions throughout the game, and some of them are going to be revealed. Now, there's not a lot of randomness in terms of the ones that are revealed. They're kind of pre-programmed. They're going to show up in the same year, essentially. The only exception being one of them will start up face up on round 1. So I will have the capacity to create sheep early in the game. You do not have the capacity at the beginning of the game to do all the things that you will be able to do later in the game. More and more advanced things come available as you go on. Your choices become more complex the more choices you have. But that means there's room for everyone to be able to kind of get good things, at least on their first pick. If the families grow too much, they won't. And the way you read these, well, some of them just tell you what you do. So this is like a player's first and second. Okay, so you're allowed to do an occupation, which turns out to be one of these occupation cards, and we'll talk about these as they show up. But then it also tells you the cost for this, Now there's another occupation here where your first occupation is free and each additional one costs 1. It's a slightly cheaper, better version of it. So you almost always go for this one first. These cards produce stuff each, the word is round. Each round, which is a series of worker placement where all your workers get placed. That can pile up and thus get more and more valuable, and you can drop into it. But there's others like this one, take 1 grain. This does not produce a grain every turn. It is, you can get 1 grain for that. So you're immediately saying, wow, grain must be pretty valuable. Yeah, in a weird sort of way, and we'll maybe talk about some of that. As we go on through the game, more and more of these will be coming out, and some of them have complex sort of dual actions. In some case, those dual actions are choices like this. You can build rooms and or build stables, and there's costs for both, and you're allowed to build multiple quantity of them. But some of them are do something after something else, or do something first and then do something afterwards. The do something first has to be done first. If you can't comply with that, you can't put your worker in that space. And there's enough spaces that you will find something that you can do. So the pieces, yeah, I was talking about these. People, fences, which you're going to use to build your pastures with, and stables, which can either hold animals or they can improve your pastures that are fenced in. You also have a wooden hut with 2 rooms in it at the beginning of the game, and 2 people that start there. On the other side of the wooden hut, there's an upgrade for it. If you can upgrade your entire house to clay huts, and I don't think that exists yet. I think that's in the thing. So until that ability comes out, you're not going to be building clay huts or clay houses, and then that can be further advanced to a stone house. And the costs for upgrading are surprisingly cheap given the cost for building a room. A cost for building a room is 5 of the material that the room's built of, plus 2 reeds, thatched roof. Everything has thatched roofs unless you have some kind of advantage. Let us talk, these are fields. You get these by playing the plow field ability, and you're able to drop one into one of your spaces. That'll allow you to grow either wheat or vegetables. These markers are in case other things, you have too many of something else and you're running out of counter mix on some of the other markers, you can use them. These little guys, I'm not sure entirely what they're for. It tells you. They're claim markers with guest on the reverse. Yeah, I don't know. They don't have a color or anything. So I think you kind of just point this arrow towards whoever it is. What's going to happen is sometimes a resource will show up on a card that hasn't happened yet, and you can point to indicate whose resource it is. There aren't enough of them by any means for the number of resources that are going to show up there. So, gosh, I don't know. Okay. What else is there? Food markers. You start off with 3 food, unless you're the first player. The first player gets this disc, who only starts with 2 food. That's because there's an advantage. They get to pick the best thing that's out there. And I guess the feeling is on the first turn, there's at least one thing that is clearly better than everything else. I don't know. Probably the 3 wood space is my guess, but I'm not sure. It might be the plow a field. It's hard to tell. I think it's the 3 wood. These tokens represent different things. So for animals, these are cows, these are piggies, and these are sheep. For the discs, This is grain, vegetables, wood, clay, stone, and reeds. Each of them have their own valuations in terms of what you can do with them in building your little engine. Their value at the end of the game is based on this, and we'll take a look at this because this is something I didn't pay enough attention to and kind of was surprised sort of by my values at the end of the game. So you're going to get scoring for fields and pastures that you have, and in general for these things, if you have none of them, you get a penalty point. But if you have a number of them, you can get up to 4 points on it. Grain and vegetables. These are going to be either growing in your fields or in your stock. And no, not for soup. Sheep, boars, and cattle. These will be that are kicking around in your pastures. You're allowed to have one pet inside your house. Yeah, I'm going to have a cow inside my house as my pet cow. I don't know. I don't want to think about it too much. But again, each of these, if you have none of them at the end of the game, you're going to get negative point. And depending on what the resource is, you need fairly large numbers to get the maximal points from it. Those aren't the only points you're going to score, though. You lose a point for each one of these that you have empty. It's neither a pasture, field, nor house at the end of the game. You get a point for every fenced stable that you have in the game. You can build stables outside fences. They'll hold an animal. But if they're built inside the fence, they double the grazing value of that pasture, which could be multiple spaces. But anyway, if it's within a fence, it's worth a point. And if you've upgraded your house to clay, each of the rooms in the house is worth a point. You get 2 points per room for each room in a house that's been upgraded all the way to stone. That's not a trivial thing to do. First of all, there's no stone production on the board except this card at the beginning. And let's see. I don't think the capability to upgrade your houses is in play yet. You also can't have children at the beginning of the game. That's somewhere in the deck. And this is something you'll get used to where things are, but it's pretty easy to forget. Now, there's a compendium that helps you find this kind of information, but I'm still at too low a level of playing this game at my second play to make a hell of a lot of use out of any of that. Where else are we? Yeah. And then the final thing is each person you have in your family is worth 3 points. You get additional points for improvements, and there's 2 kinds of improvements in the game. These are called major improvements, where you're competing with everyone else for them. But you also have minor improvements in your hand, and these minor improvements have a couple of things. One, they might have a prerequisite. So in this case, I would have to have 4 occupation cards played. Occupations are kind of like improvements. Now, you can build minor improvements at the beginning of the game. There's one space that allows you to do it, and it's the only space on the game that gets you the first player marker. Then there's a cost over here. Here, if you have the prerequisites and you take this action, you're allowed to play this minor improvement. Here's another one that has a prerequisite. This one doesn't have a prerequisite and no cost. Doesn't have a prerequisite, but it has a cost. It costs you a wood, and it has a special ability. Almost all of these have special abilities. Some of them will affect your score at the end of the game. Some of them give you some capabilities. Occupations are similar, except I don't know if any of them have prerequisites or anything like it. I don't think they have prerequisites or costs. But they effectively do in the sense that, gee, this card's not going to be useful until maybe the end of the game. But they give you some guidance as to where you want to go in the game. Okay. So, for example, here it's the street musician. And it has a number here, which indicates the number of players that the game has to hold for this to be included in the deck. The reason I'm playing with 4 players, or a reason I'm playing with 4 players, even though it makes my life harder, is that all the cards go in with that. Now, I have multiple decks as well, some of the expansions in here, and I threw them all in. But this will give you a grain when any other player takes the traveling player's action on the action space. That's kind of cool. Somebody else goes here, and they'll be getting some food, but you get a bonus grain out of that. That's actually a very valuable one. However, if you play that, you've just created a disincentive for people to go there. Now, this is a collect up space, so it has some incentive for people to go there because eventually the value of it will get high enough that somebody wants to be there. Plus, food is important, especially early in the game. Let's see what else. Okay. Some of these have capabilities that are kind of interesting. So let's take a look at a fireplace because these are fairly common. So at any time in the game, and generally this will be for harvest, but there are other times when you could use a food. For example, there are some of these occupations that require you to pay a food or some other resource to another player in order to take an action. Those can be pretty devastating. There may be other things that require you to pay a food to do. I know that that particular one was, occupations, yeah. When you want to take a new occupation, once you've gotten, if you go in this space at all, or once you have an occupation and you go to this space, you're going to have to pay a food or more in order to obtain more occupations. So it's kind of cool to have this at any time food conversion capabilities. There's a lot of minor improvements that allow you to do it during the harvest phase, which is when you need to feed people. But this, like, I can turn a vegetable, if I have a vegetable kicking around, into 2 food. And what I'm doing is I'm just cooking it. And I can cook a sheep, a boar, a cattle. I can't just cook grain, though. There's not many things that allow me to just turn grain into food. What I have to do is something called bake bread, and there's no baked bread open at the beginning of the game, which makes grain seem not all that valuable maybe, right? Yeah, but these are kind of expensive to build. So this one costs 2 clay, that's not bad. But when you get up here, some of these, well, these aren't that bad. But some of these have like a 3 stone cost to them, which is a big deal because at the beginning of the game, your only way to get stone is 1 per turn from this in general. Okay. I think I need a break, then we're going to dive into the rules. So let's start sliding through the rules, I guess. The setup, again, there's a little bit of randomness here, but the cards more or less come out to a certain pace. This is all fixed. This is fixed by number of players. This is really where you've got some random stuff. Each player has their own hand of occupation and minor improvement cards. And that's what's going to kind of guide you. And then, of course, what order of play you're going in. So the actual play of the game, for each of these rounds, what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is you flip over a card. If there's any resources owed to a player, which happens usually through the occupation cards, some of the minor improvements, I believe. If there's any resources that are owed to someone, they're distributed at this point. They just go into that person's pocket for use. And then you deal. So in the first turn, this sheep is turned over. But I wanted to do it first. The next thing you do is you place goods in the cards that accumulate goods. So 2 wood would show up here, boom, boom. A sheep would show up here, 3 wood here, etc. Okay, food in these. But not all of them accumulate things, and I've noted that before, like the take 1 grain. That's all you get. Okay. Then you start working, and work is pretty simple. You pick one of your people, you put them on an action space, and you take the action involved there. If it's a resource space, you take all the resources into your pocket. If it's got instructions, you follow the instructions. If it's got an and or, etc. You put 1, then the next player goes. Each player goes through. Some people may have more family members than others, in which case they get to place more pieces. Once everybody has placed all their people, all the people go home. Now, there's a lot hidden in here, which is some of these actions, and we'll go into more detail about that, have significant rules to them. They're not just grab the clay. Okay. Every year, there's a harvest. Once you get to the end of the last turn of that year, you perform the harvest. This year is a little weird. It has sort of an extra turn without a harvest. You wouldn't be able to use the harvest on that first turn, probably. Okay, so for a harvest, the first thing you do is the field phase. If you have plowed fields with grain or vegetables in them, you may take one, well, you must take 1 grain or whatever's there, one of that thing, grain or vegetable, into your stock. Then you have to feed your family. It takes 2 food per family member. These are food. You may also have capabilities, like through here, for creating food from other resources. If you can't or don't want to feed your family, each food that you don't feed people with, they go out begging, and they're going to get -3 victory points. I looked. Here's the victory points I got for my game, 40 and 32, then with 2 people who did significantly worse. And then over here I'm looking at people who probably know the game significantly better. We're looking, low 30s here. First play that they had was a little bit more varied. But I think what you're seeing is the players getting closer to understanding after, a few plays. And then, then the game's boring, right? There's only so much you can add to it. The patterns, it becomes kind of how do you make your occupation cards and minor improvements work, because the knowledge of the engine after 4 or 5 plays becomes pretty common. And that's okay. I mean, I don't get 4 or 5 plays out of anything. Anyway. After you feed the family, then you go to breeding. If you have 2 or more animals of the same type, they have a baby of the same type. If you have a place to put it, and that's important. You can keep 1 animal as a pet in your home, but otherwise you're going to need to fence off some pasture space, and this pasture space will hold 2 per space that's fenced off. Has to be the same kind of animal. If you have a stable in here, that doubles it, so it would be 4 per space. Fencing things off gives you a couple of advantages. 1, you can keep animals there. 2, you're not paying a penalty for unused land at the end of the game, which can be expensive. Okay. Finally, at the end of the last harvest, you go to the end of the game and you do the scoring as indicated here. So, some of the actions are very specialized, but here are some of the basic ones. Extend wooden hut or renovate it into a clay hut or stone house. There's extend here. That's an action. This other thing, renovating, is an action we haven't seen yet. But you're going to pay a cost, in this case to add a room. If you have a wooden hut, let's see if we can see that. I believe it's 5. Yeah. It's going to cost you 5 of the material of the hut plus 2 reeds to add a room, if you do that as your action. Renovating costs 2 of the material you're upgrading to, plus an extra reed, just because you damaged the roof or something. In general, you can also build stables, and that's an and or on this one, and it's 2 wood per stable. You're not going to have a lot of resources early in the game. In some of the cards, they say stage 2 here, there's a renovation action that allows you to purchase a major or minor improvement after performing the renovation. You may not ignore the renovation to play the improvement alone. It's after doing X. It's an option whether or not you want to do the improvement, but you must do the renovation in order to get it. Family growth. In stage 2, there's some family growth capability that starts showing up, and there's another one later in the game. Generally, for family growth, you need a room to put the new family member in. Later in the game, you can start overcrowding. The other one allows you to add additional people. But if you expand your house when you have additional people, they'll go claim their room. So you won't be able to do the normal baby making procedure. You'll only be able to do the more advanced one that allows you to store babies in the same room. If you have, so the child will get placed on the card along with the active parent who is spawning. It only takes one of your people to spawn. And they'll be available for you for the next turn to place. Now there's a special situation, which is if you place them just before the harvest, they've only been alive for a couple of months, so they only eat 1 food instead of 2. But of course, a child who's even 6 months old or whatever can do any job. Perhaps something's being abstracted. I don't know. Okay. Another action is plowing fields. Now, this is weird. Yeah. I don't know why they're putting this in here. The take 1 grain is just a simple order. That's an action. It's a standalone action. Putting them together like this helped confuse me. The take 1 grain, you put your piece there, you get a grain, boom, you're done. Plow a field allows you to convert an empty field into a plowed field. Now, you have to keep all your house pieces orthogonally adjacent, all your fencing orthogonally adjacent. You want to, maybe there's not a rule on that, and all your fields orthogonally adjacent. So you have a little bit of puzzle building type stuff where there's some competition. In my play, I didn't find anybody who had any real problems with that, but nobody filled up their card either. Now there's a sow action, which is not available initially. I don't know when the first one comes out. They don't say here. And does this? Yeah, this tells you the cards. So the first sow is actually in stage 1. It allows you to sow and bake bread. The sow action allows you to put one vegetable or grain in each of your empty fields. And then you get 2 additional of that thing piled up on that field. And then each harvest, you get to take 1 counter off and put it into your supply. Again, that doesn't sound real to me. Yeah, let's plant my grain. and then next year, 3 times as much grain is available, but I can only harvest 1/3 of that. The same amount that I planted. Something's wrong there. But never mind. In some cases, you have the capability to bake bread. I think it's almost always as part of another action. And baking bread is using this functionality. There's going to be a little bread marker there. It has this little something X in there. So like this turns 2 food into 4 grain, or 2 grain into 4 food, which is not a very good deal compared to this thing, which turns 1 grain into 5 bread, or 5 food. Why? I don't know. This one, however, is worth more points. It's a smaller oven, but it's more valuable because something. Okay. Raising animals. I think I've kind of already explained these. When you grab animals, and there'll be like sheep available initially, you have to have a place to put them. Now remember, you can keep one as a pet in your home. Any others, though, you probably, a stable can hold one, need some sort of pasture land defined. You have to have it completely fenced in. Only one animal can be in one fenced in area. I find that this is excessive, although you could put more fences in, that this is about the size that you want to go with. It can hold 4 animals to begin with. You put a stable in there, it can hold 8. If we look at our victory points, 8 sheep is worth 4 points, and you might want to eat some of those sheep or some of those animals because you can cook them in the lower level cooking devices. Fences, you're allowed to fence in stuff. That's not available yet. We have to look here. Fences is in stage 1. You'll be getting that in the first year since the sheep is already allocated and obvious. So you're not really going to be raising animals until that card comes up. Unless you have an improvement that gives you special abilities. There's like an animal pen. That's not on your board. It's just a card that can hold a couple animals. Stables. When you do this, you're allowed to build stables. They double the field capacity of a pasture. Occupation and improvement. So at the start of the game, you have 7 of each of these. And these are what differentiate you between different players. At the beginning of the game, there's 2 occupation spaces available in this many players. It may be different in different number of players because, see, here's the thing. When there's less players, you need less actions. So, I don't know, what's on the other side here. So this is the family game side. So if we look here, in 3 players, it looks like there's only 3 cards total. I don't know. They have the 2 players. There may not be any cards available in 2 players. Anyway, they give you different functionality towards these. Take 1 resource of your choice. Wow, that's shittier than the one of each. But anyway, you know, that's where attempting to balance these cards out, make sure that maybe not all of them are going to be as good at the start. You know, this one's going to have 2 clay, this is only going to have 1. But their flow over the game is going to produce a certain kind of balance of opportunities, one would guess. Anyway. So when you get an occupation one, you pay any cost involved with that occupation. You choose the occupation you want to put into play, and you put it into play. Some of them may have restrictions. I'm not going to look through all of them. No, I think the restrictions on the occupations are all implied in the sense that you wouldn't want to take that action early in the game before you have certain capabilities. But maybe, because there are only 2 of these here. Then the other thing is the improvements, and there's only 1 of them available to begin with. Here we get 2 more improvements in stage 2. Stage 1 has an improvement. There's going to be a fair amount of this capability, I guess. Anyway, when you get an improvement, some of them are linked to other capabilities, and you have to do that capability before the improvement or whatever. You have to meet any qualification here, so this would be 4 face-up occupation cards, and you have to pay any cost that's listed here. I'm kind of going over that. Improvement cards have, and occupation cards have special rules, and they're almost all very special. We have to treat them as they are. We talked about scoring already. Yeah, we went over that completely. And then here we have this compendium of all the cards in the base game and all the functionality. But again, I've got additional decks. I don't see any additional rules that go with them. That's about it for this. It's not a complex game rules-wise, although some of the rules, some of the things like, are these one space? You know, I didn't really gel with me right away, in part because of the presentation, whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a simple, you place pieces, and you're trying to achieve your point salad at the end of the game as best you can. The big warnings, don't starve your people. Aim for, sorry, I gotta see. Excuse me. Aim for your bonuses where you can get them, but also be opportunistic, you know? Hey, maybe you don't need wood particularly for what you're looking for, but if there's like 6 or 9 wood on a space, damn man, you gotta take it. It's gonna open up opportunities somewhere. Almost everything's of value. There are things that are a little bit less valuable than others. So for example, reeds. Reeds are important to build rooms, but without certain cards, they're gonna be really hard to make use of large quantities of. So they might just sit there. Obviously, the opportunity has to work. You can't grab animals if you don't have room for them, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of thing fitting in here. I'll send this up, and then I'll torture myself with this game.